Welcome to my channel. I'm Ben. Today, we step into the story of a scandal that shattered political trust, a senator found in a budget motel room before dawn, with questions swirling about what really happened behind that closed door. Before dawn on March the 9th, 2017, the Super 8, along South 135, wore the quiet of any roadside stop-humming ice machine. Thin carpets, a vending light that flickered like a tired pulse. Down one corridor, two more police officers paused at a door and breathed in. The air was sweet, skunky, unmistakable. Marijuana, knuckles rapped. Silence. Another knock. A chain scraped. The door opened to a stale rush of smoke and the low whir of the bathroom fan. Inside stood a man the public would recognize in a suit, but not like this. Rumpled. Phone face down, keys pooled on a laminate nightstand. Across the room, a teenage boy kept his eyes down. As if memorizing the pattern of the carpet could change the facts, officers asked simple questions that landed like stones. How old are you? Are you here alone? Do you know each other? The answers did not fit the picture the man had sold for years. The portrait of family values, church on Sundays, a handshake that promised order. The officers asked again. The teenager's age did not change. On the bed, a backpack sat half unzipped. On the desk, a takeout cup cooled beside a plastic hotel pen. The man spoke about misunderstandings and mixed messages, about helping a kid study for a credential he had not earned, about a couch and a spare bed and a ride. The hallway camera had seen the arrivals. The odor had carried under the threshold. The messages, the ones that travel faster than alibis, would speak in their own time. Later, the public would watch body camera footage and freeze a single frame. A t-shirt stamped with a Bible verse. Ephesians 5:22, a command about obedience worn like a dare. That image would become an emblem of a night when the gap between reputation and reality yawned open in a budget motel room. The door closed behind the officers. The questions kept coming, and what they were about to pull from a teenager's device and from the man's digital shadow would turn a closed room into a federal case. What exactly did the messages say, and how did a roadside motel become the fault line that split a political life in two? Ralph Allen Lee Shortey was born on February 16, 1982, in Oklahoma City. To many who later followed his downfall, the irony was bitter. He had been raised in the same soil that praised discipline, faith, and family. His imposing frame, over 6 feet tall, stocky build, became part of his public image when he launched into politics. Friends described him as a fable, charismatic, a man who could shake hands at church picnics and command a room at campaign rallies. He married, had children, and often referenced Christian values when speaking to his constituents. Shortey's rise in politics was swift. In 2010, he was elected to the Oklahoma Senate as a Republican, defeating multiple challengers in the primary. In 2014, voters returned him for another term. His platform emphasized family values, limited government, and a firm stance on crime. Behind the podium, he projected the confidence of someone meant for higher office. He even launched a Republican consulting firm, adding the title of businessman to his resume. In 2016, his political influence peaked. Shortey served as the Oklahoma campaign chair for Donald Trump during the presidential race. That role placed him in the national spotlight, linking his name with a movement that promised to restore order and morality for a conservative state. His image fit perfectly. A husband, father, churchgoer, and rising Republican star. But away from the cameras, fragments of contradiction appeared. Reports later revealed he spent significant time on Craigslist and messaging apps like Kik. Investigators would say he used aliases, such as Jamie Tilley, seeking out younger males with offers of money or favors. The persona of a stern lawmaker advocating morality was fraying against a hidden life lived behind screens. Those contradictions made his eventual arrest all the more shocking. Here was a man who had built a career on preaching values to others, caught in a motel room with a 17-year-old boy. The gulf between the public narrative and the private reality was wide enough to engulf a career, a family, and a reputation. His wife and children bore the collateral weight, forced into the glare of scandal that twisted every prior campaign speech into an accusation. For the teenage victim, the portrait was different. Prosecutors later described him as vulnerable, already marked by instability, trouble with school, brushes with drugs, and a search for direction. To him, Shortey was not a senator in marble halls, but an adult offering attention, money, and a hotel room. In the imbalance of power between a politician and a teenager without a diploma, the seeds of exploitation were evident. What unseen pressures, what hidden impulses, drove a man from the Senate floor to a motel corridor in Moore? The chain of events that unraveled Senator Ralph Shortey's career began quietly, with a phone vibrating in the night. In early March 2017, Shortey exchanged messages with a teenage boy he had met months earlier. The platform was Kik, sometimes Craigslist, under the alias Jamie Tilley. The exchanges were crude, direct, punctuated with phrases like baby boy and daddy, terms that prosecutors would later place before a jury. One message stood out: an offer of cash in exchange for sexual acts. Another set the rendezvous, a room at the Super 8 Motel in Moore, Oklahoma. On the evening of March 8th, the boy told a friend he had plans. That friend, uneasy, followed him part of the way, later telling police she saw him step into a white Jeep Grand Cherokee and ride away toward the highway. The vehicle matched the description of Shortey's car. The friend called the boy's father, and the father, in turn, alerted police. By the time officers reached the Super 8, in the early hours of March 9th, the pieces of a clandestine meeting had aligned. Room 120 smelled of raw marijuana. When officers knocked, Shortey hesitated to open the door. When he finally did, the haze told its own story. On the bed, police saw a backpack and a container, later identified as carrying marijuana purchased from Colorado. The boy was present, nervous, avoiding eye contact. Shortey wore a t-shirt that seemed designed to provoke headlines. Cartoon sandwich, above a line from Ephesians 5:22, the biblical verse that instructs women to submit to their husbands. That image, captured on police video, traveled swiftly across newsrooms. Officers questioned both occupants. Shortey insisted the boy had told him he was 20. He spoke of offering help with studying for a GED, of simply providing shelter. But investigators had already pulled text conversations from the boy's tablet. In those lines, Jamie Tilley arranged a meeting, promised money for spring break, and spoke explicitly of sexual favors. The timing of the messages coincided with the boy's departure from his home and his ride in Shortey's Jeep. The overlap was damning. Police secured the room and gathered items: electronic devices, the marijuana container, condoms, lotion. Each object painted a picture that contradicted Shortey's claims of innocence. The officers documented the smell, the boy's age, and the senator's presence. What might have been dismissed as rumor was now evidence, time-stamped and photographed. By mid-morning, news spread through Moore that a state senator had been detained in a motel with a minor. Shortey turned himself in later that day. He was released on a $100,000 bond. But the spectacle of a lawmaker walking out of custody cast a long shadow. Television cameras recorded every step. His denials that there had been no sexual intent, that he was merely helping a troubled teen, collided with the evidence of digital trails and physical proximity for the boy. The hours in that motel room became the centerpiece of a case he had not sought but could not escape. Prosecutors would later detail his vulnerabilities, his history with drugs, his dropout from high school, his attempt to test for a GED, Shortey's defense that he had been mentoring, providing support, clashed with the explicit tone of the kick exchanges. The contrast between written messages and spoken excuses would soon move from interrogation rooms to a courtroom. The crime was not a single act but a convergence. A senator, a teenager, an online alias, and a motel room off Interstate 35. The setting was ordinary, but the implications were extraordinary. It was a collision of public trust and private betrayal. The motel corridor, the hall camera, the uniformed officers, all would be replayed before the eyes of citizens who once voted for him. If this was the evidence found on a single night, what would investigators uncover when they searched deeper into Ralph Shortey's digital life? The morning after Ralph Shortey's arrest, the news cycle ignited. In Moore, Oklahoma, the motel corridor was no longer just a hallway. It was evidence. Officers collected surveillance footage, cataloged the smell of marijuana, and secured the boy's tablet. On that device lay the digital trail, messages from Jamie Tilley, the alias prosecutors would later tie directly to Shortey. The words were explicit, the timing precise, and the link undeniable. Cleveland County prosecutors moved quickly. On March 16, 2017, Shortey was formally charged with 3 felony counts: soliciting a minor for prostitution within 1,000 feet of a church, and transporting a minor for prostitution. Each charge carried years of potential prison time. The presence of a church near the Super 8 added symbolic weight, an extra legal violation layered atop the rest. Detectives also searched Shortey's home, seizing electronic devices. Federal authorities soon joined in. The FBI and the U.S. Secret Service traced online accounts, matching IP addresses to Shortey's residence and office. Conversations pulled from Kik and Craigslist revealed patterns: offers of money, references to spring break, and requests for sexual services. What began as a single motel encounter widened into a digital web spanning months. Shortey's public defense remained fragile. In interviews, he insisted he believed the boy was 20. But investigators noted that the teenager had discussed dropping out of high school and struggling to earn a GED, details that should have raised doubts in any adult, let alone a state senator. Detectives pressed the inconsistencies during interrogation. Shortey's explanations faltered under the weight of chat transcripts that mirrored his life mentions of his coffee shop, his children, his closing hours. As the evidence mounted, political fallout was swift. The Oklahoma Senate stripped Shortey of his privileges, his office, his parking space, his committee positions. Colleagues from both parties, including Governor Mary Fallin, called for his resignation. On March 22, 2017, Shortey resigned his seat, ending a political career that only months earlier had aligned him with a presidential campaign. But state charges were only the beginning. By September 5, 2017, a federal grand jury indicted him on 4 counts: child sex trafficking and child pornography. The federal indictment included not only the March Motel incident, but also allegations that Shortey had distributed explicit videos from his smartphone in 2012 and 2013. The scope had expanded from one night in Moore to years of conduct. Faced with federal prosecution, Shortey pleaded not guilty at first. His attorneys maneuvered, questioning the admissibility of certain digital evidence. Yet the weight of forensic analysis, recovered chats, geolocation, witness statements loomed heavy. Investigators could pinpoint his alias Jamie Tilley through network data, tie conversations to his devices, and demonstrate his presence at key times. The investigation revealed a duality: a senator campaigning on family values while arranging illicit encounters online. For law enforcement, the contradictions made the case stronger. Jurors would not only see the text exchanges, but also hear about his public speeches, juxtaposing morality preached with actions pursued. As the case moved toward trial, the question was no longer whether Ralph Shortey had lived a double life, but how a courtroom would weigh evidence against the mask of a senator. By the time Ralph Shortey's case reached federal court, the stage was heavy with contradictions. The man who once strode across the Oklahoma Senate floor now sat at a defense table, a suit still on his shoulders, but stripped of its authority. In front of him, prosecutors arranged exhibits: chat transcripts pulled from a tablet, photographs of the motel room, surveillance logs, and testimony from officers who had knocked on door 120 at the Super 8. The state-level charges, filed in Cleveland County, had already fallen away, overtaken by the scope of the federal indictment. On September 5, 2017, a grand jury accused him of 4 federal crimes: child sex trafficking and child pornography, stretching back to 2012. Shortey pleaded not guilty, his lawyers attempting to carve gaps in the evidence. They questioned the reliability of digital forensics, argued about chain of custody, and painted their client as a victim of overreach. But the transcripts spoke louder than rhetoric. Jurors saw lines where Jamie Tilley asked for sexual favors in exchange for money, with details that matched Shortey's real-life references to his coffee shop, his children, and his closing hours. Officers testified about the odor of marijuana in the motel, the teenager's presence, and the senator's demeanor. One officer described the T-shirt with Ephesians 5:22, a detail that underscored the hypocrisy in stark visual terms. The prosecution's narrative was clear: a public servant who used his position to mask predatory behavior. They argued that Shortey knew the boy was underage, pointing to conversations about dropping out of high school and testing for a GED. Even if the defense claimed ignorance, federal law drew hard lines. Prostitution involving anyone under 18 was criminal, regardless of claimed consent. Faced with this mountain, Shortey shifted. On November 30th, 2017, he stood before a federal judge and entered a guilty plea to 1 count of child sex trafficking. In exchange, prosecutors dismissed the child pornography charges, but the admission was devastating enough. He was taken into custody immediately, the image of a senator turned felon sealed in courtroom record. Sentencing came in September 2018. The government asked for a lengthy prison term, citing not only the motel incident, but also evidence of prior misconduct. Prosecutors revealed that Shortey had engaged in sexual activity with the same victim on 2 occasions before the arrest. They urged restitution for the boy, framing him as a victim of exploitation who deserved care. The defense asked for leniency, pointing to Shortey's prior service, his role as a father, his willingness to accept responsibility. They requested placement in a Texas facility with a sex offender rehabilitation program. Shortey himself addressed the court, apologizing to his wife, his daughters, his constituents, and the broader Christian community he had once claimed to represent. The judge delivered the sentence: 15 years in federal prison, followed by 10 years of supervised release. In addition, Shortey was ordered to pay $125,850 in restitution. The gavel struck, and with it, the career of a senator ended not with applause, but with iron bars. Yet beyond the verdict, questions lingered. What drove a politician who preached family values into the shadows of child exploitation? And what could psychology reveal about the man behind the mask? Ralph Shortey's story is not simply about law-breaking. It is about the collapse of an identity carefully built on public virtue. Psychologists who examine cases of sexual exploitation by authority figures often speak of cognitive dissonance, the gap between the values one professes and the behaviors one pursues. For Shortey, that gap was wide enough to destroy a career. As a politician, he preached family values, limited government, and Christian morality. His speeches invoked duty, responsibility, and faith. Yet behind closed doors, investigators found a man using online aliases to seek out teenage boys. The contradiction suggests compartmentalization, a psychological strategy where an individual separates conflicting parts of life, believing they can coexist without exposure. But in reality, the more rigid the compartments, the more catastrophic the collapse when they collide. From a legal standpoint, Shortey's defense hinged on claiming ignorance of the victim's age. He said he believed the teenager was 20. But American federal law leaves little room for such arguments. Under statutes governing prostitution and trafficking, anyone under 18 is considered a minor, regardless of claimed consent. Courts have consistently ruled that mistake of age is not a shield. Thus, even if Shortey's claim were taken at face value, the law rendered it irrelevant. Another layer lies in the psychology of power. Senators occupy positions of influence, often surrounded by deference. This environment can breed a sense of invulnerability, the belief that normal rules bend around them. Shortey's decision to meet in a public motel, in a car recognizable to witnesses, suggests recklessness rooted in perceived immunity. Criminologists describe this as optimism bias, the assumption that one will not be caught, even when risks are obvious. The use of online platforms like Craigslist and Kik points to a pattern of predatory grooming. Messages recovered by the FBI showed Shortey offering money, framing encounters as exchanges, and normalizing illicit behavior through casual banter. Experts in child exploitation note that predators often minimize their own actions, recasting them as mentorship or assistance. Shortey echoed this, claiming he was helping with a GED, but the explicit messages told another story, revealing intent that undercut any defense of altruism. The plea deal itself reveals a calculation. By admitting to child sex trafficking, Shortey avoided the more explosive charges of child pornography distribution. This was a legal strategy to limit exposure, but it also underscored the strength of the evidence. Defendants rarely plead guilty to trafficking unless the case against them is overwhelming. In broader terms, the case highlights a societal danger. When figures of authority mask predation with rhetoric of morality, the betrayal cuts deeper because trust was foundational. Constituents voted for a man who claimed to protect children and families. Instead, his actions endangered them. Psychologists describe this as moral injury to the community, the wound inflicted when leaders violate the values they swear to uphold. And so the trial ended, but the ripples of betrayal were only beginning. How would the public, the media, and the political world react to the fall of a senator once seen as a rising star? The sentencing of Ralph Shortey in September 2018 marked the legal end of the case, but the reverberations stretched far beyond the courtroom. In Oklahoma, the fall of a sitting senator convicted of child sex trafficking was unprecedented. For voters who had once cheered his speeches about morality, the betrayal cut deep. Editorial boards across the state framed it as a cautionary tale about unchecked power and hidden vice. His resignation in March 2017 had already left his constituents without representation, and special elections filled the vacancy. But the stain on the state's political image lingered. Colleagues in the legislature distanced themselves. Governor Mary Fallon, who had once worked alongside him, condemned his actions as shameful and deeply damaging to public trust. The Christian community he had invoked so often during campaigns struggled to reconcile his words with his deeds. Pastors in Oklahoma City spoke publicly about hypocrisy and the danger of elevating politicians as moral authorities. For many churchgoers, the image of Shortey in that Motel t-shirt bearing scripture became a grotesque symbol of double standards. Nationally, the case fed into broader conversations about online exploitation and the vulnerabilities of minors in the digital age. Federal authorities highlighted how Craigslist and Kik platforms accessible to teenagers became conduits for predators. Advocacy groups pointed to the need for stronger protections, more digital literacy for families, and accountability for leaders who exploit technology. For the victim, anonymity was preserved in legal records, but the trauma lingered. Prosecutors emphasized restitution to cover counseling and support. The young man's struggles, drugs, school, instability became part of a narrative about how predators target the vulnerable. Shortey's 15-year sentence and 10 years of supervision were meant not only as punishment but also as a signal. Status does not shield one from justice. Shortey began serving his time in a federal facility in Texas, one with a program for sex offender rehabilitation. Reports note that in February 2019, the Bureau of Prisons placed him at FCI Seagoville. Behind bars, his influence shrank to nothing. His name now synonymous with scandal. The legacy is paradoxical. For some, it is a story about hypocrisy in politics. For others, it is a reminder of the resilience of law enforcement in holding leaders accountable. But for Oklahoma, the memory endures of a senator who rose with promises of family values, only to fall in a haze of marijuana smoke and betrayal. And so the vault closes on this case, leaving behind not just a conviction, but a lesson carved into public memory. Power may hide secrets, but secrets cannot silence the truth forever. Every crime story leaves behind more than a conviction. It leaves a lesson. In the case of Ralph Shortey, the lesson is painfully clear. Power and reputation cannot be shields against accountability. He built a career on preaching family values, yet his actions behind closed doors betrayed those very ideals. For communities, the warning is that predators are not always strangers lurking in dark alleys. Sometimes, they are trusted leaders, people in positions of authority, who exploit their influence to target the vulnerable. This story also reminds us how technology's simple apps and online ads can become dangerous tools. Platforms like Craigslist and Kik are part of daily life, but in the wrong hands, they expose young people to predators who know how to manipulate, promise, and lure. It is a call to parents, teachers, and communities to stay vigilant, to talk with teenagers about the digital world, and to protect them from risks they may not see coming. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think cases like this change how much we trust public officials? Should leaders who campaign on morality be held to a higher standard? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's have a real conversation. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss an update from us.